Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's workshop. It's a pleasure to have you all here as we discuss a critical component of our journey as we build our platform towards climate action in tourism, measuring and managing carbon emissions. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll explore key global developments, some practical tools, and real-world applications via Senkit's case study that will help us navigate the path towards a more sustainable Caribbean tourism sector. We have an insightful agenda ahead, starting with remarks from our Secretary General and CEO, our esteemed partner, Sustainable Travel International, followed by expert presentations and interactive discussions. I encourage you to engage actively, share your insights, and take away actionable strategies for yourself and your organizations. Now, to formally open the session, I invite Dona Regis-Prosper, Secretary General and CEO of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, to deliver opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Narendra, and good morning to everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this first session on Sustainability in Action webinar series. As we gather today, we recognize that tourism stands at a critical juncture, one where we must transition from awareness to meaningful action in our efforts to combat climate change. On behalf of the Caribbean Tourism Organization, it is my pleasure to extend my gratitude to our partners, Sustainable Tourism, Travel International, UN Tourism, and to you, our participants, for joining us in this discussion on carbon measurement as a pathway to climate action. For those of us who live in the Caribbean is not just a destination, it is our home, a place of rich cultural heritage, breathtaking landscapes, and vibrant communities. However, as a region heavily dependent on tourism, we are also particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and biodiversity loss are not distant threats. They are realities that demand urgent action from all of us. It is within this context that today's webinar is both timely and crucial. As the global community moves forward with ambitious climate goals under agreements such as the Paris Agreement, the Glasgow Declaration, and the recent Baku Declaration on climate enhancement action in tourism, we in the Caribbean must ensure that we are not left behind. The ability to measure and manage our carbon footprint is a fundamental step in shaping a more sustainable and resilient tourism sector. Today, we will explore the Carbon Calculator tool presented by Sustainable Travel International, which offers a practical and impactful way for stakeholders to quantify their carbon emissions and develop strategies for reduction. This session is more than just a discussion. It is a call to action, and the Caribbean Tourism Organization understands that we must empower our destination management organizations, hotel operators, tour companies, and our tourism sectors, stakeholders with knowledge and tools to integrate carbon measurement into their operations. By doing so, we not only align ourselves with global sustainability standards, but also protect the future of Caribbean tourism for generations to come. I encourage you to fully engage in today's sessions, share insights, and explore opportunities for collaboration. Let's work together to ensure that the Caribbean remains a leader in sustainable tourism and a model for climate resilience. Thank you, and I look forward to an insightful and productive session.
Thank you so much, Secretary General, for those inspiring words. Next, we have remarks from Paloma Zapata, CEO of Sustainable Travel International. As the CEO of Sustainable Travel International, Paloma Zapata spearheads the organization's global initiatives to enhance tourism's role in conservation, destination protection, and community well-being. With over 18 years of experience, she has successfully led impactful sustainable tourism and economic growth projects in 30 countries. She manages the organization's efforts to engage the tourism industry in taking climate action and leads destination leaders and communities in defining a well-balanced destination model. Paloma, the floor is yours. Paloma, you may want to unmute.
Thank you. Apologize, technology. But yes, thank you so much, first of all, for that introduction. I want to welcome everyone to this session on behalf of Sustainable Travel International, to this webinar that is co-hosted by the partners that I've been working with in the last few years. So very excited to be part of this conversation with everyone that is taking the time to actually come to this session or actually listen to it at their own time. So for many of us, the Caribbean holds a special place in our heart. Not only some of us are from there, but we like to visit there. It has stunning natural beauty, rich cultural heritage, and very warm and welcoming people. So it's a place that we want to cherish. However, the threat of climate change advances, and the global conversation around this topic also is intensifying. So it's very clear that there's a lot of work ahead to safeguard and treasure these Caribbean destinations, both in an immediate action and, of course, in collaborative action. So, so we at Sustainable Travel International, we believe in practical hands-on approaches to sustainability. So throughout today's sessions, we're going to explore how carbon calculators can empower businesses, governments, and local communities, individuals to track their emissions and make data-driven decisions accurately. So we hope that by equipping each and every one of you with the right tools and strategies, we can collectively drive meaningful change to ensure that the Caribbean remains vibrant, resilient, and prosperous for generations to come. Thank you. I think now you're muted.
All right. So thank you so much, Paloma, for those valuable insights you just presented. And now let's set the stage now for our discussion today. And we now turn to Virginia Fernandez-Trapa from UN Tourism, who will provide a contextual overview connecting key outcomes from COP29 and the Baku Declaration to the importance of measuring carbon emissions in tourism. Virginia Fernandez-Trapa is Program Coordinator on Sustainable Tourism and Resilience at UN Tourism. She is responsible for the implementation of initiatives addressing the global challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution within the framework of the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program. In particular, she leads the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action, the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, and the Global Roadmap for Food Waste Reduction. She also supports the organization's work stream on tourism ocean action. Virginia joined UN Tourism in 2007. She holds a law degree from Universidad Complutense de Madrid and a master's on sustainable development of tourism, as well as on destination policy and strategy management. Virginia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Narendra. And if you allow me to add to that intro and bio, I would say, and she really loves the Caribbean. So thank you so much for having UN Tourism as part of this important meeting. Thank you to Secretary General Regis-Prosper and to the colleagues in Sustainable Travel International. Paloma, it's a pleasure to be working together on this. I mean, since COP29 took place, the Caribbean Tourism Organization has been by our side, and we very much appreciate this. Many of you will have heard already that COP was historic for our sector. Let me show you why. I brought a couple slides, hoping that I will be able to find them. See, here they are. Just a second. I suppose they are working, right? So, as I was saying, COP29 was historic for our sector because, believe it or not, it was the first time that tourism was actually included in the action agenda officially. Before we had side events, our sector was mentioned here and there, but never had the political recognition that we achieved at COP29 with the support of the Republic of Azerbaijan that had the presidency. We see this recognition as a testament to the growing understanding of the role that our sector can actually play in the response to climate change. And there was actually one message that resonated in Baku across the different discussions and interventions. And it's very timely to mention it today because the common message was actually that resilience must be at the heart of tourism transformation. Today is Global Tourism Resilience Day, as you know. So far, at present, a bit more than half of the nationally determined contributions are acknowledging our sector as a vulnerable sector. The NDCs of the Caribbean countries, in all of the cases, mention tourism as a vulnerable sector. And after COP29, we now see a stronger collective recognition that tourism has to be part of the solution. So what does this mean? We think it means two things. First, that we need to work very actively on building resilience for tourism businesses, of course, but most importantly for the communities and the destinations that depend on tourism. And second, that we must lead the transition to low carbon tourism business models and more sustainable behaviors. We need to embrace innovation and solutions to speed up. So the good news, what you see on the screen, is that we have a strengthened framework for climate action in tourism. We have, on the one hand, the COP29 Declaration on Enhanced Climate Action in Tourism. That's consolidating unprecedented high-level political commitment. At COP29, at COP29, more or less 50 governments had endorsed it. Now 62 governments have endorsed it. And I really would like to encourage the Caribbean administrations to join this effort and endorse this declaration. It's still open for endorsements, and it will be until COP30. And then on the other hand, it has been mentioned already, we have the Glasgow Declaration initiative, which was the foundation of Baku Declaration. It is implemented under the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program, where we at UN Tourism collaborate very closely with UNEP, and actually is the tool for action, and it has already catalyzed more than 380 climate action plans by tourism stakeholders. So here another invitation from my end for colleagues listening today to join the Glasgow Declaration initiative. So I guess what we would like to do now collectively is to leverage on this strengthened framework to advance faster and basically put it at the service of the destinations that tourism operates in, at the service of the businesses that sustain local economies, and at the service of the millions of livelihoods that tourism supports worldwide. As we said, today is Global Tourism Resilience Day, so we need to put this strengthened framework to good use for climate resilient tourism development. And resilience is a complex concept. What is it? What is climate resilient development besides a development that is resistant to climate? How do we advance in this arena? And actually on the screen, you can see a definition from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And the IPCC actually defines climate resilient development as a solutions framework that successfully combines strategies to deal with climate risks, so adaptation. I think that's the one that is maybe more obvious that comes to mind when we think about resilience. But it has to be combined with actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, mitigation, as both will result in improvements for nature and people's well-being, and therefore the connection with the topic that we have at hand today. So we're looking at reducing the exposure and vulnerability to climate impacts, but we're also looking at conserving biodiversity, and we are looking at cutting down our emissions. And most importantly, we need to look at the interactions across them. We need a holistic lens because, as you know, adaptation measures can lead to mitigation-related benefits. For example, if we think of mangrove restoration, the mangroves are capturing carbon, or water efficiency initiatives, and mitigations actions can also lead to adaptation-related benefits, like, for instance, using renewable energy can reduce the dependency on fossil fuels, or managing waste in a more circular way can reduce landfill-related pollution. So, holistic lens. And obviously, you can imagine measurement is a very important piece of this work. On the bottom line, you see the pathways that are proposed by the Glasgow Declaration, strategic pathways, we call them, which are measure, decarbonize, regenerate, collaborate, and finance. And you can't really reduce what you don't measure, and you also can't prepare yourself very well for risks that you have not identified. Maybe measuring risk is a bit of a stretch, but we at least need to be aware of how climate is going to impact you. So I'm really happy that to see so many connected. I encourage you to take practical actions forward. Looking for perfection is really pointless. And what is important is that we get going as fast as possible and together. So count on us for continue supporting these efforts. And thank you very much for having us once again. I think you're on mute, Narendra.
Okay, thank you so much, Virginia, for that comprehensive and holistic overview, on setting the context for the presentation to come. I want to also echo that call you made for destinations to go ahead and examine and perhaps sign on to the Glasgow Declaration. I think it's a very valuable, policy stride, in that particular direction. And of course, one other point I want to make as well, coming out of COP29, another positive was we got to have closer collaborations, stronger collaborations, and so on with UN Tourism, CTO, and of course STI with Paloma. And of course, coming out of that closer relationship and partnership, I mean, this is the first of many presentations, I'm sure, to come. So thank you so much for that. Now, as we move on now to talking about the carbon calculator, Paloma Zapata will now guide us through how this tool works and its relevance for tourism businesses. Paloma, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, here we go. I'm going to share. And okay, yes. Well, thank you for the context, Virginia. It was an historic day to really have the conversation in Baku, and of course, the collaboration and just like the alignment. It's really an important day, and hopefully we can continue with that momentum. So I'm going to, get into this conversation, starting with climate change. Of course, we're saying that it's bringing impacts that could be devastating, especially for low-lying islands like the Caribbean. As the ice cap melts, the sea level is rising, and if we are programmed for the sea level to rise at unprecedented rates, we can lose up to 60% of our Caribbean resorts. So it's a real threat. I'm going to take you through some of these particular climate change evidence that I've lived through, having been in the Caribbean, or I'm from the Caribbean as well, from the Dominican Republic, but I've also worked in Caribbean destinations, and I've seen the devastation. I was working and privy to the devastation that both Irma and Dorian caused in St. Martin and in the Bahamas, which was an incredible amount of loss in US dollars because of the infrastructure that was lost. And of course, livelihoods and communities were very much affected. So this is a real threat that we have seen in our lifetimes have increased these extreme weather events. Coral bleaching and disease is also endangering our beautiful coral reefs that are so important, not only because of their aesthetic appeal for the tourism industry, but for marine biodiversity. And of course, with marine biodiversity, we have our beautiful beaches and we have food security as well. So a super important ecosystem that is very much vulnerable and at risk. And we have seen these coral bleaching events happen in our lifetime. Another thing that we've seen a lot is the sargassum problem. When I was a child, seaweed was just seaweed. We did not have this amount of sargassum that it's mothering our beaches and our reefs, and it's really deterring visitations. Those beautiful sceneries and those beautiful beaches are very much, that scene is what you're seeing in this picture right now. It is not as beautiful as our Caribbean beaches are, used to be. So very much a threat to the tourism industry in itself, which the Caribbean is very much reliant on. But not only are the Caribbean islands affected and they are vulnerable to climate change, but tourism in itself is also a culprit. Nowadays, tourism accounts for 8.8% of global CO2 emissions. So CO2 emissions in itself, if we were just to go back, it's not a bad thing, but the Industrial Revolution has exacerbated the amount of CO2 emissions in the air, which is what's causing climate change. So there's an unbalance. And in this regard, all of our industries are very much affecting climate change, and tourism is definitely, one of them. And of course, we are reliant on tourism for our economies in the Caribbean. And of course, they are also contributing to these climate change effects that are devastating our destinations. So we have the opportunity. We do have the opportunity to really reshape the way we travel and act as guardians of these destinations. So there is still time. So this is why this conversation is super important to do it now. And of course, you can't manage what you can't measure. So this is the starting point. This particular sentence is so true in this case. All of us who are working in tourism businesses or tourism destinations, we measure our success by how much we sell, how many tourists come to visit our destinations. Those are metrics. So we also need to start measuring what is that CO2 footprint that this activity is creating. So it's important. That's the main starting point. We cannot manage it unless we start measuring it. So this is the premise of the conversation that we are having today. So when we measure carbon emissions, these are the different buckets that we are measuring. We're measuring the flights, we're measuring the cruise, we're measuring other modes of transportation, for example, boating and yachting, inter-island ferries are also included in here. The accommodation sector, the different types of accommodations that we have across the islands, food and beverage, and of course, tourism activities. And within the tourism activities, we are measuring, the vans, the taxis, the boats that take us to the diving sites, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the main buckets that we look at when we measure the carbon footprint. And of course, this is the intensity of the fuel that is being consumed to actually power any of these transportation modes or accommodation, again, dining and activities. So I'm going to show you some statistics. So transportation accounts for about 80% of the travel emissions in Caribbean islands. And this is an example of St. Kitts, and you see over here that about 50% of the carbon emissions is actually emitted through flights. No, the Caribbean islands are very much dependent on flights, and a lot of long-haul flights are the main culprit of the carbon intensity of the destinations. Then you have cruise. Of course, cruise is another big bucket because it's another way how tourists get to the destination, and it also has a very high intensity amount of fuel consumption. So it's a big bucket. You also have boating and yachts, which is a growing market. But of course, you use fuels to get to motor the vehicle, these yachts that come to the destination. And then, of course, you have accommodation, meals, like I was saying, very much a very smaller component if you look at the overall breakdown of the carbon emissions by category. And activities will be the third area. It's a very large area. If you look at activities, you will also find that the luxury segment will have the highest carbon emissions. And why is that? You're talking about private jets, you're talking about luxury super yachts, you're talking about, catamaran rides, maybe you have scenic rides, helicopter rides, and things of that nature. So the luxury segments tends to be would have the highest carbon emissions of all the different activities that you can do on an island. So I'm going to take you through an example of a carbon calculation of a trip. I invite you to look at our carbon calculator online, and you can do this at the same time as I am reading the results. Now, you will find that in the carbon calculator that we have online, you will have the flights, you will have cruise, you will have accommodations, and you would have activities, but broken down into the specifics, like, boat rides or taxis, or let's say you also have the yachting, etc. So this is an example, for example, of a romantic getaway to Barbados. So let's say you have a round trip flight for a London-based couple who's coming to Barbados, and they go on a premium economy flight. That's about 5.8 metric tons. Now they stay in a 5-star resort for 6 nights. That's only about 0.29 metric tons. They eat 2 meals a day at least, and let's say meat-based meals. That's a very smaller component of the CO2 emissions. And they also experience different activities on the island. They could go diving, they could do an island safari, a luxury catamaran, etc. And then, of course, they have transfers to and from the hotel and the airport. So we're talking about 6.2 metric tons. But what does that mean, right? A lot of times, it can be very abstract to talk about carbon emissions in a metric ton. So what exactly does that mean? So here we have some equivalents. So 6.2 metric tons of CO2, what does that mean? So it actually takes 103 tree seedlings to grow 10 years to sequester and store that same amount of carbon. Now, that's our natural way of storing carbon, through our trees, through our mangroves. I mean, mangroves actually can store 10 times more carbon than a tree in a rainforest. So this is also an important ecosystem, but it really takes a long time, just that one trip for that one couple. And also another equivalent, so that you can understand, it's about 1.4 gasoline-powered vehicles driven in 1 year. So that one trip can be equivalent to driving that one car or 1.5 car, gasoline-powered car in 1 year. That's the same amount of emissions. So this should give you some perspective as far as what it takes to clean that from the air. And another type of example, something that we do every day, which is to drive a car. Well, some of us drive cars every day. And that's, an equivalent, so that you can understand, what exactly does that mean. Now, how can your business or your destination can take climate action? So we already have the frameworks that Virginia discussed, with us, the Glasgow Declaration. Now we have the Baku Declaration, but the pathway always starts with measure. Measure your baseline. You have to measure your baseline. You have to set a target. You have to set a reduction target, and then you have to work your operations to reduce those carbon emissions. And of course, that's going to take a lot of finance. That's going to take retrofitting, and that's going to take you to change the way you do things today. So it's about taking, baby steps, all of us, to really start this process, because again, we're in a climate emergency. Then you do the mitigation and the adaptation, which is super important as well, to reinvest in regenerating those spaces like mangroves, and also, adapt to climate change, make your facilities, stronger and better equipped to, let's say, to handle those storms. And of course, you can always, offset those emissions that you cannot reduce or in this pathway. And finally, to empower travelers, empower your suppliers, and collaborate with other stakeholders to make this a virtuous cycle, and then continuously measure, because again, you cannot mitigate, you cannot control or manage what you don't measure. So you have to constantly be measuring to see how you're doing. So it's important to have the right tools to be able to measure consistently your carbon emissions. So we're going to talk about the measurement tools, because this is what we're here to talk about. And so what measurement tools do we have for the tourism industry that is available to everyone? We have API tools. So basically to measure all of those things that we talked about, the accommodation, the flights, the tours, everything, so that your business can connect to the API and use that, those measurement tools that are specific for the travel industry. We also have free online tools specifically for tour operators and events. I'll go into it a little bit further. We also have embeddable calculators that you can download. You can put it on your website, and anyone who comes to your website can measure the carbon emissions of their tourism, of their travels. And we also do destination level carbon footprint. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that, what we've done in St. Kitts. And specifically, I showed you some slides as far as what the results were of further understanding what is that carbon footprint by markets, by segments. And then we worked with them to also mitigate those and be able to manage and control and improve moving forward through an action plan agenda. So you can use the scan as well to look at our measurement webpage, and you can look at all of these different tools that we are presenting to you today. So carbon calculator. So this is the carbon calculator that you can measure your footprint, all the different travel activities. You can see, for example, that as a destination, you can download it and you can put it on your website. You can use it's an embeddable calculator, and you can select, your brand colors, and that tool is there for anyone who comes to your website to be able to measure their carbon footprint and also to offset that carbon footprint. So these are some examples of ways that can be done by a destination or by an individual company who can use that carbon calculator embedded on their website. We also have a tour carbon footprinting tool. So any tour operator can actually measure the carbon footprint of a specific tour operation, right? A specific segment. So they can measure the flights, accommodation, transportation, the meals, if they go by rail, by boat, all the different activities. When they build a package, they can come to this tool and they can measure the specific carbon calculation or the carbon emissions of that specific tour. So we give you the entire tool, the entire tour footprint. So in this case, you have 10 travelers. And then we give it to you by individual, and you can use this to build as many packages or tour operations as you would like. This is also a free online tool that we have. Thirdly, we have the event carbon footprint tool. So of course, Caribbean is also very much an event destination. Not only do you host summits and different large events, but you also have weddings, you have like destination level activities. So any event planner, any event manager can come to this tool and measure the carbon footprint of their event. So it will give you the venue, the energy consumption, the meals, the accommodation, any other transportation options that you're using for this event. It gives you a carbon footprint estimation of the event. You can do this prior to the event, and then you can with estimated. You might know, sort of an estimated value of how many people are going to come to the event, but you can also do it after the event now with like the actual amount of people that participated in the event. So this is again another free online tool that is available and it caters to this industry specifically. We have APIs as well. So we have a measurement API. So everything you see powered online, anyone can actually adhere to that API. So you can calculate travel, flights, hotels, every single aspect of your of an activity, of a tourism activity can be measured automatically if you adhere to the API using our measurement or our measurement methodologies in the background. So anybody can adhere to it. And we're working towards creating additional APIs. So we're constantly improving and evolving and creating new tools for the tourism industry. And the destination footprint. So the destination footprint. So this is also super important in this tool house that we are providing because it really helps countries and regions really manage and understand their carbon emissions, especially island nations that are very much reliant on these on these flights and the cruises, as we just talked in the beginning. Our approach will measure the carbon footprint and set you on the path towards signing the Glasgow Declaration, which is what we were discussing from the beginning, which gives you that starting point so that you can pledge to also be part of this global movement. So we've worked in islands from Palau all the way down to St. Kitts. With islands have similar issues and similar carbon footprinting profiles, and also may even run into similar data issues when it comes to creating the destination carbon footprint. We worked with the island of St. Kitts, and you'll hear from Diannille to talk about their experience, working with us on developing their climate action plan. But the starting point of that action plan was measurement, right? Is the first phase, and it's the first phase in order for them to be able to, again, create that action agenda that led to the signing of the Glasgow Declaration. So that was the main starting point, and there was a discovery. It was really much a discovery. And with that information that they were able to receive, they can now make more strategic choices. For example, understanding the yachting industry. The yachting industry, especially the super yachts, are very much a carbon intensive market. It takes an impressive amount of fuel gallons to be able to power one of these super yachts. So it's a nascent market. It's a growing market in the Caribbean, but it also we need to understand it better. What are the impacts of this industry, and how can we better cater to them? So by understanding what their needs are, we can define, for example, solutions for them to be able to connect on port, so be able to create the right space for them to be able to connect on port and provide them with renewable energy sources, so that when they are idle in in the harbor, they can actually reduce the carbon emissions that they are emitting by powering that super yacht. So that's just like one example of how a understanding and knowing that measurement it can bring to solutions that will decarbonize. And then ultimately, if you also look at that, providing the solution on the ground, it could also bring more income to the destination because you are providing them a service with providing them with energy. That can be translated also to the cruise in general, the cruise market in general as well. They also need energy sources that could also plug in to on-island sources, and that could be reducing carbon emissions and again providing an income source. So there's a lot more that was uncovered through this activity that I will allow Diannille, who we partnered in this approach, to speak further about their on-island experience and how this climate action plan is helping them move forward and being able to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So with that, Sustainable Travel International, we've worked in over 100 destinations. I would say that we're very much focused on island nations. And we worked with hundreds of businesses as well across the globe to help them measure and mitigate their carbon footprint. So we have been doing this for over 20 years, and we've helped mitigate over 700,000 metric tons of CO2, and that is working again with our climate partners. And what does that mean in our context? For example, we support projects across the globe that are working to accelerate net zero transition. This is an example of one of our impact reports because we changed the number of these climate projects that we support throughout the year. And what this means is that we're helping generate clean energy, replacing cook stoves in destinations that could be cutting down trees in order to cook. And so these are efficient ways that they can help reduce that dependency. We are supporting tropical peatland, peat swamps that again store that immense amount of CO2, super important ecosystems that are very much at risk, especially in the Caribbean islands. So we've helped protect over 90,000 acres of tropical peat swamps, prevented the loss of over 1 million acres of carbon-rich forest across the world. And we're also supporting innovative solutions, in this case using mycelium, which is these mushroom connections in the soil. It's a super interesting project, but it also retain carbon in soil and enhances the crop yield. So it's very innovative, approach that is also helping store for a very long amount of time carbon emissions in the land. So these are the type of activities that we're doing to help mitigate and support the acceleration to net zero. And very much looking forward to any questions and to contact and to connect with any one of you who are more interested in participating and using the tools and being part of the solution.
Thank you so much, Paloma, for that presentation. Just one comment I saw in the webinar chat. Somebody if you can just bring back up the code, the QR code.
Oh yes, which one of them?
Someone said whenever they scanned, it's taking them to a cookbook as opposed to the calculator page.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Okay, I will get that fixed.
No problem. So
yeah, I tested it, but yeah.
No, but thank you so much. Thank you so much for telling us about the tool and so on, the carbon calculator tool. And the common thread is running through Virginia's presentation as well. If you don't measure, you can't manage, and you have to learn, you have to measure it. before you can manage it and mitigate against it. And I love the comprehensive, analysis and so on as well, where you talked about measuring, reducing, mitigating, and of course, we adapt and empower. Some statistics that stood out to me: 8.8% of global CO2 emissions come from tourism. 80% of the travel emissions in the Caribbean, transportation, the luxury market, another one that came out as well in that presentation you did. Fantastic statistics and so on. An eye-opening one as well. You spoke about it in terms of climate change and the coral bleaching and so on. And one other one comes to mind as well, our very own survival, because as climate change, the Caribbean region is the one that is most impacted from unpredictable weather patterns and so on. And all this is because of warming, the warming of the sea, the El Nino and, effect and so on that's happening in our part of the world. So the Caribbean Institute for Hydrology and Meteorology, they actually have said that, if weather patterns continue to, the temperatures and so on continue to rise, the storms and so on that we get in the region are going to be more and more severe each year. And we're actually seeing that pattern, So we are impacted, as I said, the most from climate change. And of course, this is a very, very timely webinar. I can't underscore the importance of it. And it comes on a day like Resilience Day. So thank you so much, Paloma, for sharing and for being willing to be part of this. Let us move along now to, so we just understood the carbon calculator and so on and how it's relevant for tourism businesses. Again, now we're going to move on to sharing a real world example. And we welcome Diannille Taylor-Williams, who will present the case study from St. Kitts, demonstrating how businesses are successfully using the carbon calculator to measure and reduce their carbon footprint. All right. And Ms. Taylor-Williams has been, a dedicated tourism professional in St. Kitts for over 20 years. As Director of the Ministry of Tourism, Civil Aviation and International Transport, she plays a key role in shaping sustainable tourism policies and development. Notably, she represents St. Kitts as chair of the Sustainable Destination Council, which won the 2019 World Travel and Tourism Council, WTTC, Tourism for Tomorrow Award. She recently signed the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism on behalf of the ministry, further solidifying her commitment to responsible tourism. So I now hand you over to Ms. Taylor-Williams.
Thank you, Narendra, and good day to everyone. I will be sharing as a follow-up on what Paloma shared. So allow me to share my screen. Sorry. Okay. So I'm sharing on our action in St. Kitts, the St. Kitts case. As has been said by the previous speakers, tourism is a major contributor, as was indicated by Paloma, 8.8%, and also the fact that we are highly vulnerable to climate change and the impacts. And so it makes it important, as has been said by Virginia as well, we have to measure. It is essential for us to make data-driven decisions, and so measurement is a must. Now, in St. Kitts, what we are doing is we are taking action through the development of our Tourism Climate Action Plan. Narendra would have mentioned that I signed the Glasgow Declaration on behalf of St. Kitts. That was done last year in May. However, prior to our signing of the Glasgow Declaration, we began our work because one of our goals through the Sustainable Destination Council was to be a signatory to the Glasgow Declaration. And so work began as early as November 2023, when we had our first workshop with some persons, our tourism enterprises. And we introduced the tourism climate action and the carbon footprinting initiatives to our stakeholders. We wanted to hear from them. What we were doing is using a participatory approach in the development of our tourism climate action plan. So first we met with our tourism enterprise stakeholders. Not only did we have a workshop, we also had focus group sessions as well as one-on-one meetings to hear from our stakeholders and also to collect data for the baseline data that we needed to look and to measure our carbon footprint. As small as we are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, and we wanted to have an understanding of what our emissions were. And here on this slide, I'm just sharing why is it important, although this would have been said by the speakers who went before me. We have always maintained that the tourism in St. Kitts, we want it to be sustainable. And we want for someday, when we mention tourism in St. Kitts, that it would automatically be known that we are speaking to sustainable tourism. Not only that, our government has determined that we will become a sustainable island state, if not the first totally sustainable island state. And our tourism climate action plan ties in to the sustainable island state agenda of the government. So not only are we working towards the sustainable development goals, we are also tying our actions into our sustainable island state agenda, or CISA, as we call it. Now, it's funny because when I was working on the presentation, I wanted to share some information in terms of the findings from the carbon footprint calculator. And for some reason, as people say locally, great minds really do think alike, because the information I chose is the same information which was presented by Paloma, and we certainly didn't collaborate on this, but it was something that was very striking to me, and so I wanted to share this information in terms of the sectors where the measurements were taking place. We looked at cruise and flights, and of course we expect those to be high, and the activities. Now, in addition to that, I also wanted to share something that was critical and that jumped out at me when I looked at the measurements that we received, having done all the baseline work. And this was one that was mentioned by Paloma as well, in terms of the yachting or the luxury yachting sector. So in 2020 and 2021, when we were dealing with the issue of the pandemic, and we were looking at how do we re-emerge from the devastation that COVID brought to our destination, we looked at areas where we could do well, especially when the opportunity for persons traveling internationally was not an option, especially by airlines and certainly not by cruise. And so one of the things we looked at was yachting. That would have been one of the ways we could have recovered, in addition to intra-regional travel. And we thought that that would be something that would assist us in terms of our emergence from the effects of COVID. However, when we look at this in terms of the breakdown by activity per person, we recognize that the luxury yachting far outweighs all the other activities that we would have measured when we did the carbon footprint calculations. And this is something that we need to pay attention to, as Paloma pointed out. Now, already we have begun looking at shore power for the cruise lines, but we now have to take into consideration that this would also have to be extended to the yachts that come into our marinas. So that's something that's also we are paying attention to, and that's something, as a result of us having done this measurement, that we are aware of. Prior to this, we probably would not have been aware of the impact that yachting has in terms of our carbon footprint. Now, having gone through the exercise of measuring and continuing to develop our tourism climate action plan based on the 5 areas that Virginia mentioned, which are part of the Glasgow Declaration, we came up with 10 priority areas based on the carbon data. Now, I forgot to mention that our climate action plan has not yet been submitted to UN Tourism. So it's not yet completed. But one of the steps that we took, in addition to meeting with our tourism enterprises, we also met with policymakers. So we had a special workshop specific to our policymakers. And all of this was before we signed the Glasgow Declaration. It was exactly 1 month before the signing of the Glasgow Declaration that we presented the information that we had gathered from our tourism enterprises and shared it with persons in government to get their feedback in terms of their actions and how what our tourism businesses were doing would tie into that. Having done that, we then identified 10 priority areas, which are listed here. We're going to look at measurement, of course, because we have to continue measuring, having established what our baseline is to determine how we are doing in terms of reducing our carbon footprint. We also wanted to look at things like product development. In tourism, we are constantly being asked to refresh our tourism product. But how do we do this product development without compromising the ecosystem of the destination? We also looked at waste management because this is critical, and this has been an issue that we've been grappling with over the years. Local sourcing, how can we do more local sourcing? Marine conservation came out as another major issue, and this would tie in to what Paloma shared in terms of the coral reefs and the bleaching and also the loss of our coastal areas. Marine conservation. Private sector engagement also we felt is a must. It does not make sense for us to in government to be developing policies if we do not have the buy-in of the private sector. And so we wanted to identify this as a key area that we must address in terms of our actions based on what we would have discovered from the data gleaned from the carbon calculator. Infrastructure decarbonization. Now, all of these play a critical role in reducing our environmental footprint in tourism. Now, from these 10 areas, we have identified several projects. So some of them, although it speaks broadly to measurement actions, for example, on the measurement actions, one of the identified projects would have been dealing with the collection of data to support the measurement going forward. So as a result of this, we had another workshop just a short 3 months ago. We held a validation workshop and we presented these to a mix of stakeholders, both public sector and private sector stakeholders. And we had quite a large turnout at this session. We presented the key areas to them and we asked them to identify what our smarter, because these are smart priority areas, but we wanted smarter priority areas, those that we can take action on in the short term. And from these, we shared all of the projects and we had our stakeholders identify the projects that we could address in the short term. And they came up with 5 key projects or 5 smarter projects. And these were identified as the Island Cleanup Initiative, and we are looking at doing monthly island cleanups because we want to address waste management and pollution and also the impacts on the marine environment. We also have the issue of the plastics And for years, the Sustainable Destination Council, which I had been advocating for a reduction in single-use plastics in St. Kitts. And we are quite pleased to see that the Ministry of Environment has taken this on. And as of this year, we would have a ban on many of the single-use plastics. So we still have cleanups to do within the destination. And so we are proposing that these be done with the support of the Ministry of Environment. Another project that was identified for short-term implementation is the Moor Reef expansion. And this would support marine biodiversity conservation. And it was funny because the group that worked on this had one of our longest serving dive operators as part of the group. And he had some very interesting ideas as to how we can deal with the Moor Reef expansion based on what he would have seen over the years in the marine environment. He also spoke to, and that group, coral reef protection. Now, these two projects are linked, although they're not exactly the same, because we are creating more reefs, but we're also looking to protect the reefs that are already established. Cultural heritage preservation. St. Kitts, as many of you would be aware, is not necessarily a beach destination, but we are a destination with many historical sites. As a matter of fact, we have over 200 historical sites that have been identified. And so we felt that this was important, and it would also play a part in terms of our preservation, our tourism product development. This is a key part of product development for us because we are focusing on community-based tourism that reaches especially into our rural communities. Tied to all of this, we felt that tourist awareness and education was important. So we focused a lot on awareness and education for residents, but sometimes it is felt that we need to create awareness and educate the visitors to our destination to show them the impact they have on our destination and to give them some tips on things they can do to reduce that level of impact. So we want to engage them. We have created some material that can be distributed to our visitors, placed in our hotels and in the areas frequented by our visitors, that educates them on how they can assist us in our sustainability journey. Now, this is just an example of the case for the island cleanup, which is one of the priority projects. And we are hoping that we would have reduction in litter, indiscriminate dumping, marine pollution, and strains on our landfill areas. We've seen where we are having a challenge already. We are looking at where can we create a new landfill, because the landfill that we have is already overrun. But if we can reduce the amount of waste generated, then we would have addressed some of the challenges being experienced. And we know that the landfills and the indiscriminate dumping and the waste also contributes to our carbon emissions. Now, the second example is the case for the Moor Reef expansion. And the picture we use here is the work that we recently did to re-nourish one of our beaches. And we want, because the reefs are under threat, we want to introduce more reefs by creating artificial reefs, which we've done here on this project, which promotes marine biodiversity and also helps in terms of food from the marine environment, which would reduce our need to import some of the seafood that is needed, especially for visitors to the destination. Now, here are some of the challenges that we experience in measuring our tourism carbon footprint. One, this was a major one for us. There were data gaps and inconsistencies. There was a lack of comprehensive data from key tourism sectors, such as cruise arrivals, yacht arrivals, and on-land behaviors or activities. Another one was limited exit survey data. So while it is we had exit surveys, the data that was being collected did not adequately support the information that we needed, especially for luxury yacht travelers and the activities that they engage in. We also had incomplete emissions reporting. Public tourism infrastructure such as the airport, marinas, and the waste management facilities not yet reporting on their carbon emission. Fourthly, the sector-specific challenges. The yachting market, we had a challenge in getting data from this area because there's no standardized data collection within the destination on things like the vessel length, engine size, crew versus passenger composition, because we have the bareboat charters where crew are also passengers. We also had limited local capacity and coordination as a challenge because we lack a centralized climate data repository. However, efforts are being made to address this situation even as we speak. There's insufficient interministerial communication and harmonization with respect to data collection. These things were identified as a result of this activity. And lastly, we had a high dependence on international assumptions. Now, because there was limited local data available, the statistics and assumptions that were used in many of our calculations were based on international data, which could slightly reduce the accuracy of localized results. However, if we were all to capitalize on this opportunity to use the carbon calculator, I think that would assist the entire region as a whole in terms of the assumptions once we are taking measurements. Now, what are the expected benefits? We are hoping as a result of participating in this activity, we would see the reduction in carbon footprint, increased destination resilience, and today being the day for tourism resilience, that is something that is key. We want an enhanced visitor experience. So we don't want to make these changes at the expense of the visitor experience. Fourthly, we want to strengthen our local economy through sustainable practices. And this picture that was painted from the measurements taken helps to support one of the initiatives of the Sustainable Destination Council, which we had been promoting over the past 7 years, which is the Heart of St. Kitts Sustainability Charter. Now, this will help to strengthen that initiative in terms of standards within the tourism industry. And all of this work together to support the regional and international sustainability efforts, such as CARICOM's climate resiliency goals and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In conclusion, all I would like to say is that our measuring of our carbon footprint is the foundation for our sustainable tourism in St. Kitts. Data-driven decision-making would lead to better decision-making, and more impactful actions. And I believe strongly that every one of our Caribbean destinations can benefit from a similar approach. I leave with this quote: measuring our carbon footprint is not just about the data. It's about making informed choices that would secure our tourism industry's future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Taylor-Williams. And this gives a good segue now into the question and answer segment. But before we get into that, I just want to thank you again for that wonderful presentation. You spoke about data-driven decisions. You spoke about understanding your carbon output and so on. And then, of course, not just understanding it, but taking action on it. I like the fact that you provided great background into the government and how they how you got the stakeholders involved, through workshops and so on the beginning. You understood, why it was important to measure and so on, the emissions. You spoke about government support, and the move towards sustainable development goals. You also presented the emissions by the sector. What I really loved as well was you identified certain priority areas. And of those priority areas, a couple stood out to me. One was product development, another one was waste management. You had decarbonization, you had local sourcing, you had measurement action, etc. But waste management is one of those that tend to go under the radar. Um, and you spoke about it again later on, when you talked about how you were planning to have a single-use plastic ban. And that is something, I think it's a great initiative, and it's a good direction to go in. Many destinations around the world have gone in that particular direction. They've started using renewable plastics and so on, renewable, cutlery and so on, replacing the plastics instead of the plastic bags and stuff. If you go to Himachal Pradesh, in North India, they actually use newspaper bags. So you don't get plastic bags in that state. They will take the newspapers, and after you read the newspapers and you fold the newspapers, it's a certain way you fold it, and you can create a bag out of it. And that is how you would buy your vegetables and so on. So I'm really happy to see that we're moving in that particular direction. I see we have some comments and some questions directed for you, Ms. Taylor. So I'm going to fire them right away. So we have one question. Is there a committee within the Ministry of Tourism that manages the collection of the carbon footprint data for the 10 priority areas that you mentioned? Can you please provide an example of an implementation action?
Thank you for the question. So there isn't a committee per se specifically responsible for the carbon footprint data collection. However, now that I'm seeing this, I think it's a great idea. We do have the Sustainable Destination Council, which is headed by the Ministry of Tourism. It was created as an advisory body to the Ministry of Tourism, and this can be one of the activities that the Sustainable Destination Council undertakes. We have been working with our partners in the council because the council is made up of public sector, private sector, and civil society members. And so we are able to collect information from our membership. And that is how we were able to action the plastic pollution situation in terms of starting with the Plastic Free July in 2017, which has led to the implementation of the ban. Now, the ban was not done by our ministry. It was done by the appropriate ministry. However, we believe our actions and the partnership with all our stakeholders on the council led to that.
Excellent. And for Ms. Taylor-Williams, what challenges did you come up with what challenges do you come up against in creating the climate action plan for St. Kitts, especially those from stakeholders?
One of the challenges that we've had, and we've seen it over the years, is the silo mentality. And everybody becomes very territorial. This is my area. And so when you're trying to get certain information from some of stakeholders, especially other government agencies, that becomes a challenge. That is why the SDC was created. In addition to that, in terms of getting information from the private sector now, sometimes it's a challenge in terms of getting the information, things like occupancy rates. Some properties are wary of giving that information, especially to a government agency. Some persons see it as a threat because it might mean increased taxation. How do you get them to understand? And that is what we've been working on over the years, to understand that we are trying to get this information at the end goal being to make our destination more sustainable. And so we are not using the information necessarily in terms of taxation, but if we were to take some of the steps identified in the Heart of St. Kitts Sustainability Charter, for example, which would increase visitor spend, there would not necessarily be a need for us to increase taxation if government were receiving the funds that should be coming to government in the first place, and we're doing the activities that we need to do to reduce our carbon footprint in terms of energy conservation and those sorts of things.
Excellent, excellent. I see as well. Let me see if we have any more questions coming in. This is the time. There's another question here. Is there a plan to address and legislate the correct and appropriate lights on the coastline from hotels, homes, and businesses to protect marine life in St. Kitts and Nevis?
I'm not aware of a plan to address it and correct it at the moment. But what we have been doing to the council is advocacy. So for the person who asked the question, for example, one of our members would have worked, and one of our members is the St. Kitts Sea Turtle Monitoring Network. They would have worked very closely with the Park Hyatt, for example, in the construction phase in terms of their lighting along the coast with respect to their hotel. And so sometimes what we do, we may not necessarily be in the position to do something directly, or it takes a lot longer in terms of reaching to legislation. What we do is we practice advocacy and we engage with the stakeholders as a means of working around that until the legislation can be put in place.
Okay, excellent. I see maybe a comment here that could be directed towards Paloma. Were those effects to reduce single plastics disregarded during or after COVID? And then there was a comment, a ban was initiated in the US Virgin Islands. However, measures for COVID as it relates to disposal countered the efforts, further expressing the need for cross-department collaborations, especially to realign. Anything you want to add, Paloma, to that one, with regards to COVID and single-use plastics and so on? You can unmute, Paloma.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great. So what was happening during and after COVID? I mean, it's such a interesting, world, what happened, during COVID, how the world stopped, right? And we stopped pollution. You could see it, and there's a lot of like satellite images, how you can actually see the world had stopped, and you see the world regenerating itself. So we were like really reducing the carbon emissions as well as the plastics that we were creating and producing and disposing of. So I think it's an interesting, conversation to see, to talk about, okay, now in a post-COVID world, how can we maintain that? Because it was previously, basically kind of forced on us, right? So it wasn't really intentional, no? So like, how can we make this now intentional? And I think it's a valid conversation, and a lot of efforts need to be made, across all of our island nations and across the world. So I think, yes, collaboration. I think St. Kitts is a great example of what they've done with plastic reductions, Plastic-Free July, and really taking on the challenge. And it's an ongoing challenge, I would say. It's not something that it's going to stop. Not only do we need awareness, we need a lot of awareness. I think that's really, really the key. For users to stop using it, you need to give them solutions. Right, so that's important, because it's not only about banning. I mean, that's one starting point, but you need to give them the solutions that are the right solutions. So that's you also need to be creative there. So yeah, banning, and then the right solutions in place, and generating the awareness continuously.
All right, there's another question coming in here. Based on the carbon data impacts mentioned, especially by the airline and luxury yachting, what are the Caribbean destinations doing to reduce their carbon emissions, which are so significant? And I know you've worked in a number of these islands in the Caribbean and so on, Paloma. So if you can just share, what some of them are doing.
I think this is a very the starting point. No, that it's a very early on conversation at the moment. And up until now, it's really been about numbers, and it's really been about growing and growing. And only now that we have the framework, like the Glasgow Declaration, it's really allowing us to kind of like sit back and be like, it's not just about growing. And we've also seen growing pains when it comes to like overloved destinations. Destinations, not only is the carbon footprint, but also other pollutions and exacerbating the communities and the resources that they have that we need to look at, that entire impact. I would say that, the main example here is St. Kitts. They talked about, what, Diannille really explained how this tool is really going to, help them leapfrog into a much more manageable carbon footprint destination. And I think that's the main example that I have to bring to the table at the moment. I think overall there is a global conversation like Corsia that is supporting the carbon emission reductions and that net zero trajectory for the airline industry. So it's a more of a global conversation for Corsia and in really supporting that transition. And specifically, then I think that St. Kitts is at the forefront, right now. Of course, there are other island nations that are doing other things. I think Barbados is, they've also done, a lot of different things. When it comes to managing and understanding their carbon footprint. But I think that we're in the beginning.
Yeah, and I think I agree with what you're saying as well, and I echo those sentiments. In terms of the Caribbean as well, as you rightly said, there are other destinations as well who are looking at different ways of mitigating and managing their carbon footprint. In fact, Curacao right now, they have a plan, and by the year 2030, that island is actually going to be running on 85% renewable energy. That's part of their plan. So that's one step that they're doing. Another one, in terms of what carbon destinations are doing, there are some islands in the Caribbean that are going after eco certifications, Blue Flag, Green Globe, Green Key, and so on. And just by going after those certifications, they have certain criteria that are built into them that allow you to reduce your impact on the environment, on the natural environment, right? So those are some of what some of the islands and so on are doing. Let me see if we can do one more question in, and then we will wrap up. The Turks and Caicos is struggling to get occupancy rate from hotels. Do you think legislation is the way forward? Yeah. So anybody want to have a try of that? Legislation is the way forward. I mean,
What are we trying to say here? I mean, it could be, you mentioned Curacao. We're actually starting the carrying capacity study for Curacao because they are actually, growing exponentially. And, I can think of how, legislation in the sense that in a well-planned destination that doesn't overdeveloped, it could really support, filling in the current capacity that they have. So it's a matter of planning, what you want a destination to be, what is the right amount of hotel and the type of hotels that you need in order to have a healthy occupancy. So I would say that legislation in the form of planning, of tourism development planning is super important. Yes.
yeah. All right. So thank you so much. Unfortunately, because of time, we want to wrap up here today. I want to thank you, Paloma. Thank you, Diannille. I make apologies for UN Tourism as well. They had to step away. They had a Resilience Day event. But if there are any questions that we're sorry we were not able to squeeze in during this segment, please feel free to email me your questions. I will feed it to the panelists, and we, of course, can get those answers directed to you. So I'm going to put my email now in the chat. All right, and you can feel free to shoot that email. All right, thank you guys so much for joining us. I mean, you could have done so many things today, but you decided, hey, you know what, I want to learn a little bit about building resilience, learning about the carbon calculator tool and so on. And we got so much out of today's session. If I had to sum it up in one line, it would be measure it and then you can manage it. Yeah. So thank you guys so much again for joining in. We appreciate it. And, goodbye. Have a great week ahead. And, take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.